Don't forget to visit marketingcasts.com to find even more custom curated marketing podcasts just like this one. That's marketingcasts.com. Hi, this is Sean Halter, host of the CMO Suite podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and catch up on all the previous episodes at www.thecmosuite.com. This episode of the CMO Suite is brought to you by Uconnect. Uconnect provides digital solutions and teams to brand CMOs, VPs, and marketers looking for true transparency in the biddable media space. From paid social and PPC to complex platforms like The Trade Desk, brands from across the world have connected to Uconnect. Visit them today at uconnect.com. And No Kid Hungry. We're proud to promote No Kid Hungry and their many initiatives to help kids in need of meals. Visit them at nokidhungry.org. This episode of the CMO Suite is also brought to you by Winmo. Winmo is the most comprehensive and widely used advertising database, providing an unfair advantage to media and marketing professionals nationwide. Winmo tracks every national advertiser, their agency relationships, and key executives within each organization. Get instant media spend, competitor tracking, and industry trend analysis in one easy-to-use application that integrates with all major CRM platforms. CMO Suite listeners receive complimentary trials of Winmo just by visiting winmo.com/CMO Suite. Finally, the CMO Suite is presented by the CMOcouncil.org as their official marketers podcast. The Chief Marketing Officer Council is the only global network of executives specifically dedicated to high-level knowledge exchange, thought leadership, and personal relationship building among senior corporate marketing leaders and brand decision makers. The CMO Council's 15,000 plus members control more than $550 billion in aggregated annual marketing expenditures and run complex distributed marketing and sales operations worldwide. For more information on membership, visit thecmocouncil.org. Let's start the show.
You're in the CMO Suite, the podcast for marketers who want to be in the know, presented by Connectivity Holdings.
This is your host, Sean Halter. As a reminder, the CMO Suite is brought to you in part by Uconnect. Uconnect provides biddable media solutions for brands and agencies across the U.S. and Canada. We are starting to come to the backstretch of Season 5. I'm incredibly excited to have as our guest today. I'm going to jump in with him in just a second. He doesn't know that I actually previously stalked him at one of his previous stops, I think, to try to get him on the show, but we're excited to have him. It's Matt Repicky, the SVP and Chief Marketing Officer for Jose Bank Clothiers. Welcome to the CMO Suite.
Hi, Sean. Thanks for having me.
This season's been super fun. I mean, we've had kind of, as we go into each season, we're not entirely sure who the guests are going to be, and we end up somehow kind of delving into this theme. And this year, it seems like it's West Coast. That's our theme. And so the whole first half, I think we had almost like everybody was in Los Angeles, and now we've picked up some people in San Francisco and some other places. I think part of that for me is because it's really our first full season that we're doing remotely. You and I can talk a little bit about that. We actually started talking about that a little bit before we started the show. So normally we do this podcast out of iHeart Studios in New York City. A lot of our guests are there, so we bring them in. We have a great conversation that feels very conversational because you're sitting across from each other. We have worked out of iHeart in New York City, and we actually started to do a couple of shows out of iHeart in San Francisco, and they literally had a power outage. We had to cancel the whole day, which was crazy, and then we never ended up getting back out there to rebook. So anyway, that said, welcome to the show. You are in San Francisco right now, correct?
That's right. Nice and sunny spring day in San Francisco.
Did you grow up in San Francisco, or where did you actually grow up, Matt?
I did. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, left at a pretty young age, and just moved back about a year and a half ago when I took the role at Jose Bank. But spent about 4 years in New York, part of that at the Jones Group, and then the bulk of it at Amazon in their fashion division.
And you said you moved, did you say when you were around 11? Is that what you said?
I left San Francisco right after high school, and just moved back about a year and a half ago.
Any brothers and sisters?
2 younger brothers. I had a great, suburban Bay Area upbringing, loved Northern California, but, I've always felt the pull of travel and experience. And so, jettisoned to Los Angeles right after college. And frankly, from there, I feel like I've been super fortunate in my career and had kind of a whirlwind, spent some time working in Paris, spent a couple of years working in Amsterdam, have done a lot of global travel on behalf of my various roles. Like I said, spent a few years in New York, back to LA, and now here, sort of finally back in the Bay Area. But, I think my career path and my journey has benefited so greatly from the chance to, work not just across the country, but around the world.
I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. Like you, to some extent, I yearned to at least travel outside of Ohio. So I think literally a week after I graduated high school, I was on my way to Florida. And I've had the chance to travel a lot since then. But having done this show, I've gotten a chance to talk to more and more global marketers that maybe I never would have gotten the chance to do without it. I've got a good friend at this point, Robin Daniels, who has been on with me on the show several times. Lived here for a long time, and then he actually moved overseas. But I do find that sometimes an executive that has that global understanding, or maybe just the chance to realize that the world is flat in many ways, and at the same time, there's a beauty in getting a chance to be able to just really experience completely different parts of the world. And as a marketer, then when you can bring that to the table, gosh, you're bringing something different or unique,
Sure.
other than just somebody who may understand how a P&L works, which is important, or is really great at digital, which is important. But gosh, when we realize we're all part of this world and how do we navigate that, what an incredible, part to kind of bring to it. So you just talked about Paris. You said you spent some time there. What did you do when you were there?
Very, very early in my career, I was in consulting, first with PricewaterhouseCoopers and then Accenture. And while at Accenture, had a client project in Paris, and so got to spend about a year there, which was my first foray into sort of like global work. And to your point, really opened my eyes in terms of the differences of doing something in a country outside of the US in a language other than English, and how do you navigate that? And I in about 2003, I joined Mattel for what was my first stint, and shortly was relocated again to Amsterdam for 2 years, managing strategic projects across Europe. And so again, started to really see and understand how you take, from that standpoint, a global company, a global strategy, and what does that mean when applied to a region or, a local country, and their needs, and how those needs may differ from, what you do day in day from a global standpoint. So those were my first kind of two experiences working and living abroad. And it's, I think, beyond just, okay, I'm in an office and I'm doing the work, but it's also the day-to-day and your grocery shopping and the errands, and how do you integrate yourself into that culture, which again, I think has benefited me so much in terms of the way that I approach problem solving and strategic work in my career today.
You spent a ton of time there in your first run, almost 8 years, I think. Yep. And so then you get a chance, to kind of come out. You spent some time then at Amazon. I want to boomerang back to that. But then you ended up back at Mattel. That's where I initially saw your name a few years ago. I was like, oh, I love this brand. It's such a cool and interesting thing. And then to see you have kind of been there and then leave and again experience more things and then come back. Do you mind talking about that part of your journey for just a little bit? What did you feel like it was like to come back after, after a few years? How was that?
Sure. It was interesting. I think, stepping away and in a lot of ways, the work and the culture continues without you. And so you come back and people have sort of moved on in one way. But, I was able to bring back, coming out of 2.5 years at Amazon, I think a very different perspective that influenced the way that I approached my work. But I was really fortunate to have been partnering with my colleagues who had kind of been there throughout. And really learn from the experiences that they've had, because partly why I went back was, how do we tackle kind of a reposition and a rebrand on Barbie, which, I've now stepped away from the brand. It's been a few years, but I'm still so proud to look back at the work that we started that is still continuing, and the team that is still in place, leading that incredible work on behalf of that brand. And so I think, going back to Mattel was interesting in so many ways, because there was a big challenge to tackle in terms of what are the things we need to do to reposition the Barbie brand, get consumers and retailers to think differently about the brand, but also how do I apply, my new thinking and the experience and maturity that I have that, I didn't have when I left here. And, what does that look like? And so that was challenging at times to, again, get people to sort of understand, hey, like while I was gone, these are the things that I was doing and you didn't see or know that, but, also really like advocate for kind of like new ways to look at, in this example, what is the marketing mix? How are we showing up to customers? Obviously I had a depth of digital experience at that point coming from Amazon, and how do I apply that to what my team is looking at? And so that part was really exciting, combined with the just force of nature, which is this 99% globally recognized brand. And how do you get people to think differently about it?
You can't walk away from that brand and not be changed as a marketer. Even now, again, it's incredible how they lead. And that was maybe 6 years ago or 7 years ago that you were there. Just their growth is crazy. What they've done to this whole industry is crazy. And so I'm sure it kind of felt that way a little bit. You come back to your old neighborhood. Maybe all the buildings don't look quite the same.
Sure,
There's still some familiarity. What an incredible, iconic brand. And so again, if nothing else, just to be able to know that you touched that brand. You took a legacy brand, you played some role, and the teams that you worked with
Yeah.
played some role. And the fact, again, that you came back as, a head of global brand for that brand, it's hard to do that if you don't bring all the levels of experience that you seem to have brought to that table, your world knowledge, your
Sure.
understanding of the world.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we get plenty of time to talk about your time at Jose Bank. I want to stick with Barbie for just a few more minutes, if you
Sure.
don't mind, because again, it's such an incredible brand. So, as you looked at that at the time as a world marketer to some extent, how did that impact your brand strategy? How did you look at France, for example, differently than maybe you do
Sure.
China or Russia versus the United States? Did you have to kind of bring that perspective, and did you have teams in all those countries, or did everything work out of the same office?
Yeah, so I mean, there's subsidiaries on the ground in a lot of those countries. And I think one of the benefits that I had in my first go around at Mattel was I'd worked on Barbie in an international capacity. And so I actually worked with the subsidiaries on taking what is a global strategy and distilling it down into that kind of like local application. And so that was already in my back pocket when I came back. So I think you want to have brand consistency, right? And so one of the things that I learned through my career is that consistency is paramount in terms of getting a customer to really click with your message. And so you have to have consistency, but then again, you have to cater it to some degree to what they need in France, in Mexico, in Korea. And that is an interesting endeavor because you do need to work and trust your local teams and find that sweet spot between, yes, this all needs to look and feel the same, but we want to make sure that it applies to what you need in your market. One of the things for me that was so compelling to leave a role that I loved, frankly, at Amazon Fashion and come back was that as a marketer, Barbie is such this iconic brand, and the opportunity to touch it and have, this leadership role and frankly, work alongside people like Lisa McKnight, who, is a general manager of the brand and really had the sort of the confidence and the bravery to like take it in a different direction. People like Kim Clemoni, who's the head of design and really spearheaded a lot of the sort of product changes. And to me, that opportunity was like something I didn't think I would necessarily have again in my career and really wanted to jump at the chance.
Are there any that you kind of remember from that time there? And then we'll jump kind of into
Sure.
Jose.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I was pleasantly surprised on you have an expectation of how a country is going to react to a change in the brand, a change in the marketing, a change in the product. And almost every single time, the local consumer actually embraced it. And so, we had, again, this global strategy and kept thinking through, are we going to have to modify it for a particular region where consumer behavior is different, where cultural perceptions are different? And we chose not to. And in the end, like it was largely embraced, which I think was interesting, kind of going back to your comment on like the world is flat, right? There are maybe more commonalities than you would expect, which I think was really interesting to see. But that said, I came to that with the benefit of having worked globally before. And I feel like if I'd never left kind of like the US, if I'd stayed in San Francisco and could have had, an amazing career journey, it wouldn't have equipped me in the same way to make some of these decisions.
Has fashion always kind of played that role for you? And it's interesting to kind of see that because, as I looked at that, you think, well, that's a vertical, so there's only, certain companies that you work for, but you've pushed outside of maybe your comfort level and scope. And so you've taken that experience to all of these kind of different, unique places to some extent. So talk about fashion and what that kind of means to you.
Yeah, it's always been a passion of mine. And even when I wasn't working squarely in it, it was something that I was interested in. And, throw back to like what I would call the hashtag menswear days of New York. So it was, 2010, 2011, when street style was really big and, guys were dressing up. And I started doing menswear writing on the side. It was like freelance gigs and I was blogging, and it was just, again, a passion project. But I was able to find ways to like insert that into my actual career, which I think, again, I was so fortunate for. And, that, led to my role at Jones, then to Amazon. And, the Barbie brand is hugely immersed in fashion. A lot of what I did was fashion collaborations while I was there. So you have to have your finger on that pulse. And then obviously, if you look at my role today, it is squarely in, that menswear space. And so it is an area that I, have a lot of heart for. And you're right, I've noticed that it's been a through line in my career with a couple of kind of like, outliers. But again, I have appreciated that I've been able to approach it and work within the space in a lot of different ways. So obviously, Joseph A. Bank as a completely vertical, omni-channel brand is very different than Barbie as, a global wholesale business is very different than, when I was at Amazon, which is completely e-commerce and all, third-party wholesale. I've kind of touched the different retail channels as well.
I talked to Fernando Machado, amazing marketer. It's always interesting sometimes to hear somebody's journey, and even like his journey, he started in the factory, and somebody came and was talking about marketing one day and invited
Yeah.
people to come, and that was his entry. I thought that
Yeah.
story was just so crazy and fascinating. And so as he's made his way through his career, and as he's kind of, if you just look at the LinkedIn profile, sometimes you can't necessarily see
Yeah.
how those dots connect.
Yeah.
And now he's over at Activision, but it
Yeah.
almost feels like when I look at somebody like him, or if I look at your journey, it needed all of those steps to kind of end up
Sure.
where he is. And that's the beauty in a career path that's done that. You've taken every bit that you've done along the way, and as there, I'm assuming again, trying to figure out at Jose Bank who's the right person that might fit this really strategic need for a legacy brand that wants
Yep.
to make sure that they're really now stepping very forward facing, that they can easily compete against the Stitch Fixes of the world, and with the challenges
Yep.
that are now faced with people working from home.
Yep.
It's a beauty. I don't know if you ever take that time yourself to self-reflect and kind of pat yourself on the back a little bit. If you don't, you should do so, because you've
Uh,
brought something interesting to this marketing space. And while we talked to a lot of marketers, honestly, not all of them can kind of say that.
I think I'm really grateful because I look, I guess, to like impart words of wisdom to fellow marketers or folks that are a little bit earlier in their career. There's, I think, two things that were instrumental for me. One was that I knew what I was interested in, which was kind of like this fashion apparel design space. And I pursued it, like I said, on my own, but also I had mentors along the way. And so frankly, Richard Dixon, who's the president at Mattel, has been a mentor of mine for a long time. And he was the one, gosh, what year was it? Who we were in a meeting about something. I was not even on the marketing team yet. And he looked at me and was like, you have an interest in this space. Like, how come you're not in marketing? So maybe similar to sort of like Fernando's journey, right? Like I had someone who identified in me the interest that I had and helped me kind of navigate there. Again, imparting advice, I would say, like, look for mentors, look for advocates, share with them what you want to do so that they can keep an eye out for you, but also pursue your passion, whether that's in what you do day to day or, like I said, as a hobby. It equips you when that time comes or that moment arises. You're ready to jump in and say, yep, here I am.
For many marketers, it's the difference between a job and a career and a journey.
Sure. Yep.
It's easy to sometimes, maybe push out and say, do something that you love. And meanwhile, you got bills to pay and you live in New York or you
Sure.
live in San Francisco. You're like,
Yep.
yeah, I'd love to be doing this. But meanwhile,
Yep.
but to your point, it doesn't have to be your first job. It could be, if the job you're in is not something you have a passion for, find some little side hustle, find somewhere to give
Yep.
you purpose. Because if not, man, it's a drone job, and you're just in there trying to figure out, how do I get out and move on to the next thing. And to your point, if you come with the right attitude, you're going to find some mentors that are going to kind of find you, and they're going to be looking around a room saying, I need somebody to do this. Hey, I know you, Matt. You seem like you're
Yep.
really interested in this. How do we
Yep.
pull you in? How do we get the best out of you? You talked about him as a mentor. Any other mentors that you feel like have been important in your life? Anybody else who's kind of helped guide your journey?
I think I look at a lot of my mentors who have actually been my peers. So, folks that I worked with when I was at Amazon who, really helped shepherd me into the fashion and merchandising space. So Kara Fisher, who's still at Amazon in the fashion division, she was my peer when I was there. And, we worked side by side, and she's someone who I look to as like, mentor / advisor, right? It's like someone you bounce ideas off of. And it's important to like have those people out there as well. I've also been, really conscious of turning that on its head and being that for my teams as well. And how do I, help give them feedback and advice? How do I help them guide their careers and where they want to go? And so I've really taken heart this idea of someone who's, again, supporting and advocating for you and making sure that I'm, again, kind of like paying it backward or forward, if you will, in terms of giving that to others. To your point, like, so much of my career path then kind of like coalesced into, hey, I got a call about there's this opportunity for this menswear brand that was started in 1905 and needs a brand repositioning, needs to attract a younger customer. It felt like so many of these like pieces clicked and, hey, I've done this throughout each of the parts of my career. And it fit into this sweet spot, again, of something I love. I mean, I know that we're not getting a visual cues here in the podcast, but sitting behind me is like a mood board, right? Because I always want, whether it's currently my home office or my, real office, inspiration and things that are kind of like within the menswear and the fashion space that I can look at every day and kind of get me excited.
To your point, I don't know that I've heard this really made that way on any of the previous podcasts. Mentorship doesn't have to be, when I say one direction, it doesn't just have to be mentor to mentee. It can be somebody who works collaboratively next to you. A mentor can be somebody who's younger than you. I've probably had, when you think about it reflectively, I've probably had more mentors that are on the younger end because this space moves so fast and so quick, where I've had employees, I've said this probably several times, you know that you've hired the right employees when you're sitting in a meeting and you're telling a client, you know, this is how we do this. And then Leland Morris, who I would call a mentor at this point, who I hired, leans over, puts his hand on, you know, on me and kind of says, you know, we did used to do it that way, Sean, but here's how we do it now. I mean, that's when you know you've hired some of the right people. And even, you know, somebody like him, I knew I only had him for a couple of years because he was too smart. I knew he was going to end up utilizing what we could teach them and then move on to whatever that next career path was for him. And now I lean on him. I'm constantly like, hey, let's pull Leland in. Let's see if we can pay him some consulting hours because I don't know how the hell this damn thing works. But if anybody does, it's probably him. Let's talk about Jose Banks. So you've been there now going over, you know, almost a year and a half or maybe going on 2 years. You came in just before pre-pandemic. This is amazing, I'm sure, from your standpoint. Here's how we're going to do it. Everybody's here, blah, blah, blah. And then here comes pandemic. How quickly were you able to kind of pivot some of your thought process from here's what I want to do right out of the gate, and then holy crap, here's something completely new none of us have dealt with, especially in this kind of space?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a masterclass in like forced flexibility.
8 years worth of work that you're going to pack in a year and a half, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, came in, brought on a new creative agency, Wolfgang out of LA, who has done phenomenal work in their past and like, you know, really cracked the nut on Joseph A. Bank and like how we reposition the brand. And we spent, you know, my first, call it 2-3 months, like building out a new brand campaign that I was super proud of, that tested extraordinarily well with, you know, a younger customer on the right attributes that we really wanted to connect with that customer on. Everything was ready to launch mid-March. And then, you know, we all know the rest of the story. And so you pull back the campaign, you shelf the, you know, creative, you pull back the spend. And so then what do you do instead, right? And we had to close, you know, all of our stores for 3 months. We then permanently closed a number of our doors as we rationalized kind of like the right presence for the brand. Joseph A. Bank has a really high e-com penetration, which is phenomenal. And so we were able to lean on our e-com presence over the past year. And I think instead we looked differently at sort of how do we approach this customer and what do they want? And so we found new ways to take what was the crux of that brand campaign and, you know, permeate it through the marketing touch points that I had available to me. And frankly, by the end of the year, saw a really market increase in, you know, millennial affinity for the brand. So that was like sort of a huge proof point of like, without a huge ad campaign out there, but just continuing to have that, like I said earlier, consistency of message and a shift in the brand positioning, we were actually able to make inroads. So that was really great to see. The other thing was just really identifying like, what are people shopping for? And I remember over the summer, the person who was running our, you know, e-com business at the time flagged that we were seeing an uptick in polo shirt sales. Of course, it makes sense. It's like warm weather, people are dressing more casually. And so, you know, we really had the team lean in and, you know, we had like triple digit year-over-year comps in polo shirts because it was like, hey, let's take advantage of something that we know our customers love and what they need right now. So I think that was a really great learning for me. One of the learnings over the past year, right, is like, how do you quickly synthesize data and then make an action plan around it, given what are some limited kind of like parameters, right? So I had some search campaigns, we could like push it through our email channel, but I couldn't go out and do a multi-million-dollar ad campaign, but I could find ways to like, again, service what the customer was looking for and really react to that changed behavior.
You've got a good looking shirt on there, my friend. I'm here wearing a t-shirt for crying out loud. Cause again, we're in our home studio, but I love that shirt.
Right. Thanks. We do some great polos. So yeah, I think, you know, it's been an interesting year to kind of just like take a look at, you know, what are the changes that we can make within some constraints. It's also leading through all of that change, right? And taking a team through, going back to the idea of sort of like, how do you mentor and coach through what is a lot of like ups and downs. And it's not just, hey, there's a global pandemic, but there's a lot of like social changes happening in the country. And, you know, there's a change in customer behavior and how do you kind of like keep working through that? And so I think from that standpoint, like, we're now at a place, I'm not going to say exiting the pandemic, but, you know, there's a shift, certainly. And it's great to look back, but now it's also like, we have to go hyperdrive on like, what's happening next and how do we plan for the future, which is kind of like where the team's at now, which is really exciting of, okay, so we had a lot of learnings, but like, what does that mean in terms of where this brand goes next?
You have the technology now to be able to say, okay, polo shirts are really hot right now because people know they got to throw something on for their Zoom call, which is kind of, again, crazy to say out loud. You're probably not going to put on a suit or a tie, which maybe, again, might be some old legacy of what people may have thought that Jose Bank kind of stood for. But now on top of the global pandemic, you have this backlog of inventory that for a lot of retailers is challenging. So how has that impacted some of your marketing as well?
Yeah, no, I think we have to be, conscious of sort of how do we move through the product and, get people what they are looking for. And again, a lot of that comes to like positioning and how we frame it for the new ways to wear. And, frankly, Sean, people want to dress up right now. We're selling a lot of suits, but maybe you pair it with a polo shirt because it is a little bit more casual than it was before. It is really fascinating to see. And I would say I'm one of those people, like now that there's, some dining reopening, every week I have dinner with a friend and I put on, if not a suit, at least a sports coat, because it's my way of kind of like dressing up differently than I was able to the past year. And I think our customers largely feel the same way. So we want to make sure that we're showing them through communication, editorial, it's like the best part of fashion is you're able to go and like shoot it and show them and give them something inspirational and kind of teach how it can be done. And that's kind of what we're doing right now, which is fun and exciting to see the consumer response.
To your point, we want to kind of dress up. We want to get out. We want to enjoy the beauty that this world is safely and effectively as we can. We got a couple minutes left here. I want to talk just a tiny bit more about Jose again, Jose Bank, if we can. It's Matt Repicky, SVP Chief Marketing Officer, again for Jose Bank Clothiers. We, Matt, we got to work with Paps for many years when they were getting ready to kind of go through that rebrand. And that was fascinating for us. We handled some of the media stuff, none of the creative. They had a really amazing creative team there that did a lot of that. But it was interesting. You were talking about kind of, I don't want to say the youth market, but kind of this other generation. It was interesting to kind of watch this legacy brand that was, the beer that my grandfather used to drink and my dad drank. Yep. But then it becomes kind of cool and it becomes kind of hip again. And so it can happen. It was really amazing to kind of see that resurgence. And in many ways, they used digital and they used experiential marketing to be able to kind of talk to that youth, because us buying a bunch of TV wasn't going to cut it. So as you're doing some of that, what are some of the marketing or mediums that you're using to try to speak to that audience? Again, you talked a bit about digital. What else are you guys kind of doing out in the marketplace? Or do you think you might have coming up as we kind of come post-pandemic?
Sure. Yeah, I think, first of all, I think the brand, had traditionally taken itself very seriously. And so one of the first things we did through kind of like this, repositioning is like lighten up, have a little bit more fun with ourselves. And we've seen the response to that and it's paying off, which is great. But also from a marketing mix standpoint, we were very traditionally TV and direct mail. Both of which I think still play a role in our mix for sure. And we have a, traditional customer who really enjoys us speaking to them through those channels. But we've really accelerated our digital investment, very specifically through social. And so, Pinterest is a new channel that we've been exploring. I think one of the things, that I worked on with our team over the past year was running an Instagram only campaign so that, we weren't just running for the most efficient campaign, which is always going to hew towards placements on Facebook, which is an older customer, but I really wanted this younger guy to get exposure to the brand. So we paid a little bit extra to go only on Instagram, and it paid off in spades. And so we've seen just like the return on that investment has been phenomenal. So that was like a really nice pivot. Really looking at audio. So running some stuff on Pandora, Spotify, how do we just show up differently? And it's all tests, right? And so and this is something like, if I say like one thing that I learned coming out of my time at Amazon, it's like test and learn, and it's huge, right? Put a little bit in, see what it does. If it works, scale it. If it doesn't, learn and move on. And so that's what we're doing right now. And changing, modernizing our mix, and like seeing again how we can get in front of and attract this new guy for Joseph A. Bank.
A little surprise and delight goes a long way sometimes. I appreciate you making some time for us today. Matt Repicky is the SVP, Chief Marketing Officer at Jose Bank Clothiers. Thank you for taking some time to spend with us on the CMO Suite.
Thanks so much, Sean.
Thanks for hanging out in the CMO Suite, the podcast for marketers who want to be in the know, presented by Connectivity Holdings.
You're a C-level manager. You shouldn't have to know the difference between behavioral or contextual targeting, but your agency should. Uconnect provides brands and biddable teams direct access to platforms like The Trade Desk, Google, Amazon, Facebook, OTT, and more. Their US-based traders can train your in-house team or provide complete transparency with no minimums and CPM-based service pricing for true transparency. Something Mighty Hive, The Trade Desk, and Centro simply don't offer. Tired of being the smartest one in the room? Reach out to Uconnect today for a free demo. Uconnect, the world's leader in true transparent biddable media.
This episode of the CMO Suite is also brought to you by Winmo. Winmo is the most comprehensive and widely used advertising database, providing an unfair advantage to media and marketing professionals nationwide. CMO Suite listeners receive complimentary trials of Winmo just by visiting winmo.com/CMO Suite.